r/NoSleep. Posted by u/sleepyhollow_101. I just took a DNA test, turns out I'm 100% in over my head. I did one of those at-home DNA testing kits. You know the ones, they can supposedly tell you your ancestral makeup, help you connect with long-lost relatives, that sort of thing. The specific test I used had this option to make your DNA available to law enforcement. That way, if there was a partial DNA match to a crime scene or victim, my DNA may help law enforcement identify the perpetrator. Maybe I shouldn't have opted in. The thing is, I've read about these a lot in the news. If you're a true crime fan, you know that these kits can sometimes lead police to catch decades-old serial killers and rapists that have long eluded capture. My thinking was that if one of my family members is actually a monster, well, I would want them behind bars, regardless of who it is. So, I opted in, but never really considered the possibility that there'd be a match. And then there was. I was contacted by my local police department and notified that my DNA had been a partial match to a Jane Doe, and that they'd like my help in identifying her. That was honestly not what I was expecting. I was a match for a dead woman? The police explained to me that our DNA profiles indicated we may have been related, and that they wanted to know if I knew of any relatives who had gone missing or hadn't been heard from in the past 5 years. 5 years? Yes, because they've determined her time of death was about 5 years ago based on the state of her body when it was found. They've reason to believe it's a homicide, although they weren't able to tell me the cause of death. Apparently, due to the state of her remains, it was impossible to tell. Well, I didn't know of any family members who've gone missing, but I don't know my extended family all that well. I decided to get my mother involved, who does genealogy. She worked with the police, going through our family tree, but ultimately, we couldn't find anyone. So, someone we didn't know we were related to, possibly? At this point, we decided to talk to the rest of my family, immediate and extended, to see if anyone else knew anything. Most of our family members thought it was pretty cool and wanted to see the mystery solved, though a few were angry at me for giving my DNA to law enforcement in the first place. The police showed us a sketch of what they think the woman would have looked like, and my mother and I agreed she had some resemblance to my Aunt Linda, particularly in the strong brow and high cheekbones. The police decided to ask Aunt Linda and her 2 children, Ethan and Bex, to submit DNA samples. They agreed. It took about 2 weeks to hear back from the police after their samples had been submitted. They probably weren't at the top of the priority list for the crime lab. But when they did get the results back, they asked Bex and Aunt Linda specifically to come down to the station. Bex actually asked me to come with her. She and I were really close growing up, basically best friends. We've lost touch over the years, but I still consider her a close friend. I agreed to go in with her, even though I wasn't sure why she wanted me there. When the police told us what they found, to say I was shocked is an understatement. The DNA from Jane Doe was an exact match to Bex. Of course, my initial thought was that there had to have been some mistake. I asked what the likelihood is that the DNA matched Bex without actually coming from her. 1 in 5.4 billion, they said. They told us that this was extremely perplexing and that they had no explanation for the match. I asked Aunt Linda if Bex had an identical twin that nobody knew about. Maybe, but she shook her head. The police told us that identical twins don't actually have perfectly identical DNA anyway, so that couldn't explain the match. I was perturbed. I'm sure you can imagine why. Bex and Aunt Linda, though, were not. They laughed, actually laughed, when the police presented them with their evidence and shrugged it off. "Isn't that just the weirdest thing?" said Aunt Linda. They were both smiling and giggling the rest of the time, which clearly made the police uncomfortable. They told the police that they hoped Jane Doe could be identified one day, but that they were pretty sure they couldn't help any further, and then left the police station. I followed after them in a daze, confused both by what the police had told us and by Bex and Aunt Linda's behavior. On the way home, I asked Bex if it truly didn't bother her. She said, "Come on, Veronica, there's obviously been some mistake. It's just not possible for my DNA to match exactly with a dead woman's. The cops screwed something up, and they'll probably figure it out in a few days and call us and apologize. Don't worry so much about it." I tried to take her advice. My mom even agreed with her, saying it had to be some sort of error and that it would get cleared up sooner or later. 3 days after we spoke to police, Bex, Ethan and Aunt Linda vanished. My mom had gone over to their place to borrow some family photo albums from Aunt Linda to discover that the front door was unlocked and open. Nobody was inside. We tried to reach them on their cell phones, but were informed that their numbers had all been disconnected. Nothing was missing from the house, they didn't take any personal belongings. Their cars were in the garage. It was like they just vanished. And they didn't come back. We reported them missing, of course. And a few days after that, the police asked my mom and me to come down to the station. That's when they revealed that they'd run Aunt Linda and Ethan's DNA through their databases and came up with 2 more exact matches. To a Jane and John Doe, whose bodies were found within 50 miles of each other in the original Jane Doe. All of them died about 5 years ago. Once is a mistake or maybe a weird, freakish coincidence. But 3 times? The police were baffled. They asked us for all the information we could give them on my aunt's family. They specifically wanted to know what they were doing 5 years ago. All we could tell them is that they'd gone on a family vacation that year, and had been gone a week longer than they'd planned. But otherwise, we had nothing useful. It's been a few months since then. The police have no answers for us, and we have no answers for them. I keep waiting for Bex to call or show up. Or any of them, really. But it's like they vanished off the face of the earth. The worst part is that there's nothing I can do. I've done so much research to try to find something that can explain what's going on, but I can't come up with a theory that makes sense. Nothing grounded in reality, anyway. All I wanted to know is if I'm part Irish, and instead I ended up discovering that my family isn't at all what it seems. Next story of this video was posted by u/sleepyhollow_101. I used to do miniatures for commission. I like making miniatures. I picked up the hobby a few years ago, started with kits. You can buy them online, you know, and they send you all the pieces and instructions. Over time, I started to figure out how I could design and build everything myself, so I moved on from kits and started making my own things. I've done a little bit of everything. Gardens, tiny cottages, offices, Christmas scenes, shops. I've tried it all to hone my skills. Flowers are my least favorite thing to make, but the most popular addition to my scenes, go figure. I do most of my work at 1/24 scale, but occasionally go as large as 1/12. Sometimes I make things much smaller. I digress. The point is, I've become pretty good at this, such that I opened a little online store where I would take commissions. I did most of my work around the holiday season. My best-selling items were the ball ornaments that I hollowed out and created scenes inside. Last year, I got a request for a larger commission. He wanted me to reconstruct a room in his house. He'd taken tons of pictures from every conceivable angle. In his email, he told me he wanted it for Halloween. He asked for a perfect replica, down to the tiniest, most inconsequential detail, and then for me to stage a murder scene in it. Then told me that if he liked it, he'd order one for every room of his house. If this request sounds weird, you should know that this doesn't even scratch the surface of weird. I've done plenty of murder scenes. I get true crime fans sometimes who want faithful reconstructions of their favorite cases. I pass on those because personally I think it's distasteful. But things like this, Halloween scenes and the like, are pretty common requests. Equally so are haunted scenes, complete with ghosts, Ouija boards, demon hoof prints, etc. For the most part, I try not to judge. So, I asked him what he wanted the murder scene to look like and he told me he'd leave it up to my discretion. He wanted to be surprised. But he did give me the names of a few horror movies he enjoyed for inspiration, and signed off his message with, "The more gruesome, the better." So, I set to work. It took me over a month of near full-time work to get it perfect. These kinds of scenes, where realism is the most important element, take a lot of time and resources. And careful planning. That's why they're so expensive. I thought he'd balk at the price. It was almost $1,000 for the completed project, including specialty shipping. You can't ship these items normally, you know, they're very delicate, but he seemed to be expecting it. I got my payments promptly. So, I made his scene. It was some of my finest work and I took plenty of photos so I could display them on my site once I had his permission. The murder scene was actually a lot of fun to design. It was like telling a story, almost. I had a body on the L-shaped couch, one foot dangling off, her throat slit. I had signs of a struggle, the table overturned, the wine glasses spilled, staining the white carpet red. I added a severed head hanging from the ceiling. The headless body was on the floor, with the other limbs severed, scattered around the room seemingly at random. Bloody footsteps led to and from the window, which was open just a crack. I hate to brag, but it was really excellent. I spent a lot of time making it look perfectly lifelike. I was confident when I sent it to him that he'd like it. And I was right, He was gushing in his email about my vision and creative spirit and how I'd exceeded his expectations. He actually sent me a pretty hefty tip along with the cost I'd quoted him and refused to allow me to return it. I sent it to him around September. He told me it would be the centerpiece at his Halloween party, and he'd be sure to tell everyone I'd made it. He also gave me permission to post the pictures on my online store. My fans went wild over it and I had a flood of submissions asking for similar work. I was so busy after that I didn't really think about his commission, other than to set a reminder on my calendar for November 1st to ask how his Halloween party went. As it so happened, I didn't need it. The morning after Halloween, I was working on my newest commission. I had the TV on for some background noise. I like to listen to the morning news while I work. That's when I heard the news anchor state that there had been a bizarre murder just a few miles from where I lived. They were showing the police coming in and out of the house. I recognized the place. It was kind of quaint. I'd driven by it a few times. That's when the news anchor said it. The strangest part of the case is that there was a perfect tiny replica of the crime scene found in the room where the murders had taken place. It appears that the killer had planned this for weeks and left the miniature scene almost as a taunt. Police are looking for the person who made the model. The blood started rushing to my head and there was this loud noise in my ears, drowning out whatever else the news anchor was saying. They hadn't shown the miniature yet, but that's when I opened my computer and saw hundreds of notifications from my shop. Comments on the pictures I'd posted only a few weeks before. I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you that the police came knocking at my door before the clock struck noon. I told them everything, gave them my computer, let them look through my correspondence with the man who had commissioned the piece. I spent 12 hours in an interrogation room where the police told me over and over that they knew I'd done it and that they wouldn't let me out until they got a confession from me. I refused, obviously, but it was the worst 12 hours of my life by far, hearing them call me a murderer over and over and over. Eventually, I was ruled out as a suspect. They were able to confirm that the email exchange had come from 2 different computers and IP addresses. They followed the shipping address I gave them and found it belonged to a house that had been abandoned for years, no trace of anyone inside. The PayPal address he'd used to send me the money led to a similar dead end. I helped them in any way I could, gave them everything I knew, let them tap my phone and keep my computer. They officially announced that I wasn't a suspect, but a lot of people weren't convinced. I got a lot of death threats from people who called me the miniature murderess. The last year of my life has been hell. I had to move to a new city, change my name, take down my shop, and all communications with clients and most of my friends. I can't even look at miniatures anymore, much less make them. I'm in therapy but I don't think it's been helping much. My therapist says I have PTSD and I guess that's probably true. I don't sleep well. I'm not eating enough. And then, about a month ago, I got an email to my new email address, which isn't available publicly for obvious reasons, from someone I didn't recognize, but it had as the subject, "New Commission, please read." I felt a cold sweat on my forehead as I opened it. Hi Tatiana. Loved your work last year, even if nobody else did. Halloween party was an absolute success. Had a blast. Wish you'd been there. I have another scene I'd like you to do. I know it's short notice, but I'm willing to pay extra. Pictures of the room I'd like are included. Same deal as last year. We'll follow up with more details. Thanks. Your friend. I shouldn't have clicked the pictures. I should have called the police right then. But I had to know, so I looked. And wouldn't you know it, but I saw my own bedroom. Pictures from every angle, taken while I was in bed, sleeping. The police have promised me they're going to find this guy. They've put me up in a hotel under a fake name while they scour my apartment for clues. I even have my own security rotation, and officers come to check up on me regularly. I know all their names. I've not gotten any more emails. Sometimes I'll get phone calls with just silence on the other end, though I can't tell if they're scam calls or... It's only a few weeks until Halloween now. And as the weather grows colder and the shadows grow longer, I can't help but thinking, I wish I'd never started making miniatures in the first place.